Well, good morning. Welcome back to the little video series I'm running on my experiences reconditioning this lovely old 2001 Triumph Sprint ST 955i. This time I'm looking at the brakes. The Triumph Sprint ST has dual hydraulic disc brakes on the front, a single hydraulic disc brake on the back, and they're totally independent. But in terms of what I want to do today, people regularly look at the condition of brake pads and their thickness and change brake pads, occasionally change the brake fluids and bleed any air out and get some new fluid in there. But because I don't know anything of the history of this bike, I also want to have a close look at the condition of the brake lines, and also I want to get these calipers off, pull them to bits and change caliper seals and dust covers in there and give them all a good clean. Simply because I don't know how this bike's been maintained. Plus I have this idealistic goal to make this bike just like it rolled off the factory line at Hinckley some 25 years ago. So firstly, it's just a couple of words on how the system works. Your front brake lever here, it sort of transfers the force you apply through your grip, through your squeezing it, with a certain mechanical advantage through a little piston here into what they call a brake master cylinder. That's this little bit of gear here. You've got a reservoir of brake fluid here, and in this brake master cylinder, that force pushes a little piston, and that compresses the fluid in your brake line. So you've got a brake line that runs right down here, down to your front caliper. It comes in via a little thing called a banjo bolt here, which is basically a bolt with a hole in it that lets the fluid get through the bolt and into the caliper. And this caliper here is actually attached to your fork, and when that fluid sort of conveying your braking force comes into the caliper, it squeezes a couple of pistons against your brake pads, which in turn squeeze against this disc, which is attached to the wheel. And in so doing, that force via friction slows the wheel and slows you down. So on the front, it's a dual hydraulic disc brake. So this banjo bolt also has another connection that runs here. And indeed, if I did have a mudguard on, that would go over the top of the mudguard and comes into the other little caliper on the other side, and it's just got one fitting on the banjo bolt here. Same process. Okay, out the back of the bike, it's a totally independent system on the Triumph. I should say on this bike here, one of my other bikes, it's a BMW R1200R. It's got what's called a partially integrated braking system. So when you squeeze the front brake, you actually get some of that force conveyed also to the rear brake. It's partially integrated in that when you push your foot on the rear brake pedal, it just operates the rear brake. The front brake operates both the rear and the back brake together. And I think BMW's idea there was just to get a more even braking and a bit less dive maybe. But anyway, the Triumph doesn't have that. If you look on the back here, so here's your rear brake pedal. It's got the same setup. When you press that rear brake pedal, by mechanical advantage, you're pushing a little piston up here. This is called your rear brake master cylinder. It's got a little switch, brake switch coming in here on the top. Actually, as we look at this here, you can see one of the downsides of doing up a 25-year-old bike, all the bits of rubber and plastic off and starting to degrade. That little boot I'm going to replace. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. There's another banjo bolt here that takes hydraulic fluid out this way. You've got another reservoir here, as you can see, that keeps fluid in the master cylinder and on the brake line. So that little brake line there runs right through around the back and into the rear caliper, which sits in here. I don't know whether this GoPro is going to let you see, but probably not. You've got, yeah, obviously your brake pads clamping in on the disc there as well. Same process, two pistons that receive that force that you're pushed through your brake pedal, and they clamp against the brake pads and slow down the rear wheel. So yeah, that's how it all works. Let's turn that one off. So there's numerous bits and pieces there. Obviously, the regular things people do with their brakes are check their brake pads. There's a certain minimum specified width before you recommended to replace them, and you don't want to get down to metal on metal. So a lot of people are very familiar with changing brake pads. It's a regular thing also to actually change your brake fluid. So the fluid used in these lines to convey the forces is actually quite hygroscopic. It actually imbibes water with time, and due to some of the forces you imply on braking, some of that water can get vaporized and end up as small air bubbles in the fluid with time. And because air can be compressed and the fluid can't, what happens is you feel that at the foot or at your hand, at your right hand, as a sponginess in the braking, and we don't want that. We want a very direct and firm application of your braking pressure right through to the brakes. So obviously I'm going to change the brake fluid, and I'm going to look at the disc brakes, so forth. Just one other point though, when it came from the factory, the hydraulic brake lines on this Triumph Sprint ST were actually rubber. And yeah, rubber brake lines have got a life of 3 to 4 years, depending on the load. They tend to swell and stop doing an efficient job. Somewhere along the line, someone on this bike has replaced those rubber lines with braided steel hydraulic brake lines, and they look in good condition to me. I've had a bit of a look at them. I've actually decided I'm not going to replace the brake lines on this bike. They look good on the back, good on the front. As I've said in previous videos, I really don't know a lot about the history of this bike. I've actually been back onto the original, or the owner I bought it from, just to know whether he knows anything about when the brake lines were changed. He doesn't, so it sort of means nothing was changed in the last 40,000 kilometres that he had it for. So yeah, I'm not going to change the brake lines. However, I am going to detach and drain all the brake fluid out of the line, pull the calipers totally off the bike, and disassemble them. Because one thing that does degrade in the caliper is the seal around the pistons, and there's a dust cover there as well. So got a couple of packs here I bought from Triumph. I'm going to totally recondition those calipers. So that involves pulling them all to bits, having a look at how they work. You'll start to see a pattern here with me. I'm sort of quite obsessed with understanding how everything works on the bike. And I haven't actually, the last time I was involved in pulling a caliper to bits was with a mate of mine who was actually a trained BMW mechanic. So I've never actually done it myself. So although I've changed numerous brake pads and discs and bled brakes on umpteen occasions. But for now I'm going to pull those to bits, recondition them just like I did with the forks. Change the piston seals and dust covers, and then put them all back together. Then of course I'll do the more routine things like look at the brake pads, probably replace the brake pads, change the brake fluid and bleed all the air out of that, both front and back. And of course one other thing you really need to look at as well, you can actually see quite clearly on this front disc here, the disc itself gets thinner with time because of the friction from the brake pads. Obviously the brake pads are designed to wear away first, but that doesn't mean there's no friction and no wear on the disc. So you can actually see it quite clearly here, wear on the disc. So all manufacturers will give a minimum specified disc width before you have to actually change the entire disc. So I'll be pulling out my micrometer and just checking that the discs on front and back here are both within the tolerance recommended by Triumph. Okay, and keeping up with my obsession of trying to make this bike just like it rolled off the factory production line at Hinckley 25 years ago. Okay, that's about it for now. Plenty to do. I'll get stuck into it.